Well guys, we did it. The 500 subscribers barrier is finally broken. Thank you all so much for hitting that button, and if you haven't already, I'm not happy. I haven't had time to do anything for this achievement, so I think this video should count as a 500 sub special. You're welcome. After being a fan of Thomas and Friends for many years, I've finally decided which characters would make my top 20 favourites list, and today I'm going to share them. There will be some picks that you probably weren't expecting, and some that you probably were. Please remember that I'm not like the other Thomas fans, so don't be upset if you disagree with me. Also, no one introduced in the Bwubba era will make the list. They're toys, not characters. Anyway, on with the list. Number 20, George. Season 5 has plummeted in my ranking in the last few months, but By George is still one of its best episodes. The idea of an evil steamroller that wants to destroy the railway is an epic one, and it's a crime that it was never used after the 5th season. I've said many times before that the roads are as great of a threat to the rails as dieselisation is, and George is the perfect case study. He also works as a foil to Sir Handel in one of the best Season 4 episodes, by creating a rare instance where more than one character is flawed in a classic episode. Also, am I the only one who notices that George bears a slight resemblance to Rolly from Bob the Builder? I genuinely want to see an interaction between those guys. Number 19, Peter Sam. Peter Sam was one of my favourite characters ever when I was a kid, and that was simply because he was the protagonist of The Magic Lamp. So because of that nostalgia bias, he makes my top 20. His personality is rather simple, but he's one of the most consistent characters in the show. With the exception of Don't Bother Victor, he's never had a single out of character moment, and the episodes Peter Sam and the Refreshment Lady and The Magic Lamp both get sequels in their respective eras. Peter Sam is also a talented writer and is the creator of the series Locomotives. He's the only character to have his own YouTube channel, and it's one worth subscribing to, so I've linked it in the description. Yes, this whole video is just one big ad for his channel, subscribe to it, now. Number 18, Sir Topham Hatt. This praise only applies to the first 18 seasons of the show, because I refuse to believe that the controller of the North Western Railway in season 19 onwards is the same guy. Sir Topham Hatt is a great way to portray authority figures to kids. He's stern and not afraid to tell his engines off, making him someone to take seriously, but that's not to say he's an evil dictator. He cares for the engines, and does what he can to make their lives on the island pleasant. Take Henry's arc for example. He says that Henry's condition is too expensive, yet he chooses to purchase special coal just for Henry anyway. What a great guy. Not to mention that he gladly saves engines like Douglas and Oliver from scrap, and lets them live on his railway with no extra charge. People who call this man evil have never watched Thomas and Friends in their lives. Assigning work to engines and punishing them for misbehaving is not the same as tyranny. Spread the word. Number 17, Edward. Everyone loves Edward. As the character that started it all, he's had a very strong impact on the show's history. Within the first 2 seasons alone, he becomes a mentor figure to younger engines like Thomas, and manages to overcome bigger engines like Gordon. He also plays his part in saving others from scrap, which leads to them returning the favour in later seasons. After season 2, there's not as much to do with him since his arc is completed, but it's evident that the writers have always been aware of his significance. Even when characters like Duck become less pronounced, Edward still manages to get at least 1 episode per season. He's not exactly in character all of the time, but it's nice to know that the team of Hit still wanted him to be part of the main cast, unlike Mattel. I love his dynamics with the other characters, notably with Thomas in saving Edward and Old Reliable Edward, and while his finale in season 21 wasn't the best, his choosing to leave Tidmouth to mentor a younger character is very true to him. Edward also has a big role in the only good Bwubba episode Hunt the Truck, which proves that no matter how badly Mattel treats him, he can still shine among Bwubba's worst atrocities. Number 16, Spencer. Spencer's character is very basic. He's a show-off and makes others jealous of him, that's about it. And yet he works so well because of how he rubs off other characters. His role in season 7 is to be a rival to Gordon, which was one of the many clever moves that season made. Gordon and Spencer is a fantastic end to Gordon's arc, but that's not all that was done with Spencer. Season 8 paired him up with Edward for a simple retelling of The Tortoise and the Hare, and that episode is also excellent. Hero of the Rails used him as the antagonist of the story, and he was a big MVP of the Miller era in general, Spencer the Grand being my favourite episode of those 4 seasons. Some of the stronger Brenner era episodes, such as Spencer's VIP and Two Wheels Good, gave him spotlight as well. Much like Peter Sam, Spencer has been incredibly consistent throughout the show. He's never once been flanderized, and almost all of his roles in episodes work, except for Dream On. Spencer also has a fantastic design that looks arguably better than the real-life Mallard engines, and he's a Season 7 newbie. Be prepared to see a lot of them on this list. Number 15, Sailor John. Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure was creative in many ways, and having a human as the antagonist is one of its best features. Even though Sailor John is exclusive to the movie, he's my favourite villain in the show's history, and that's because he destroys the boundaries of an average kids show's villain. He isn't just a goofy crook who wants to be rich, he's a bloodthirsty menace that isn't messing around, and Lost Treasure was not afraid to show that. He doesn't hesitate to blow up the Fat Controller's office to steal the treasure, and also attempts to literally murder Thomas while escaping. Not only that, but he doesn't get a forced redemption arc and become a good guy after receiving some stern words. Instead, the movie shows him getting arrested for his crimes and he's never seen again. This is how bad guys in a children's franchise should be written. Even the Railway series wasn't this dark. Number 14, Oliver and Toad. Oliver used to be my favourite character of all time, because I really love his arc. Unlike with James or Daisy, his arrogance and resource and sagacity is justified, because man, he just had a brush with death. If you managed to avoid your demise and got complimented by everyone else first, that would go to your head as well. However, Oliver isn't someone you want to mess with, and Scruffy learned that the hard way. Speaking of rolling stock, I can't talk about Oliver without mentioning Toad. I adore their brotherly relationship, and I don't know about you, but it's handled pretty well in the Brenner era. Oliver is portrayed as the rebellious older sibling, while Toad is the innocent younger one. I really like that Toad got more focus in seasons 18 and 19. His episodes did a great job at showing off his personality and mixing it with other characters. Toad's adventure is particularly underrated, as it shows how much he's developed after busy going backwards. Number 13, Luke. I'm slightly biased here because I have so much love for Blue Mountain Mystery, but Luke I think deserves to be on this list. Considering how low our expectations for the show were after season 15, seeing a genuinely good murder mystery movie with a very likeable new character was quite a pleasant surprise. Luke goes through such a powerful arc in Blue Mountain Mystery, where he has to live in hiding after unintentionally killing someone. This dark tone is even more subtle than Lost Treasures, and unlike Sailor John, who is a villain through and through, Luke goes through a journey to prove his integrity. Throughout Blue Mountain Mystery, you're constantly rooting for him, so seeing him redeem himself and learn the truth about Victor is really strong. Luke also develops as a character after this point. Luke's new friend and the Switch are some of the best season 17 episodes, and I honestly wish we saw more of him after that. Luke also shows a new side to the rest of the Skarloey fleet. It's really interesting to see these old, experienced engines have a younger brother figure who, while not perfect, isn't a complete jerk. And while Thomas being friends with the movie's new character is usually generic, it felt very genuine this time. Number 12, Arthur. One of my earliest videos was about why Arthur's season 7 episodes are so underrated. It's a video I feel I could have done a better job with, but I still hold all of those beliefs. Arthur isn't too complex, but the way his arc is tied with Thomas's is really clever, and that's why he makes my top 20. Both Thomas and Arthur are important for each other's growth and development. In The Spotless Record, Arthur seems like nothing more than a generic good guy plot device for Thomas to learn a lesson, but that's the point. His perfectionism is a strong contrast to Thomas, who has never had his own spotless record to break, and after being portrayed as a complete saint in seasons 3 through 5, seeing Thomas's flaws again was a nice breath of fresh air. But season 7 didn't forget to give Arthur a character of his own. Something Fishy is a fantastic episode that shows that Arthur's quiet, humble personality is his weakness when it comes to getting the job he wants, and using Thomas as a plot device for him was genius paralleling. Arthur shows that a character doesn't need to be a jerk to have flaws or an arc. I'd argue that he's the nicest character in the entire series. Yes, even nicer than Edward. Number 11, Annie and Clarabelle. In the classic era, Annie and Clarabelle were nothing more than coaches with faces, but in the CGI series they were major characters. They stand out for being a perfect balance between kind mentor figures and rather annoying fusspots. The writers of the Brenner era really loved playing with their dynamic with Thomas, and even expanded upon this by having them interact with other characters. The railcar and the coaches is one of my favourite CGI episodes solely because of the chemistry between themselves and Daisy, and Not So Slow Coaches is another really fun one. They're even able to carry bad episodes like Counting on Nia, an episode that would be a lot worse if I didn't find the relationship with Nia somewhat wholesome. Season 8 also deserves some credit for giving them big parts to play in Thomas Saves the Day as well. All in all, Annie and Clarabelle are the best rolling stock characters in the show. Number 10, Harold. Even though he's only ever had one spotlight episode, Harold has always been a standout. He's the only character in the show who's an air vehicle, and no, Jeremy and Tiger Moth are not characters, and he has a fantastic ongoing rivalry with Percy that was brought back for season 20. The main reason I love Harold is because he has all the traits of an Audrey character. He can be boastful of his abilities, which leads to the envy of others, but he also takes his responsibilities seriously and knows how to act in the face of danger, as seen in Toby and the Flood. As well as that, he's always willing to help anyone in need, which is shown in the magic lamp. All these traits make it practically impossible to write him out of character, and as a result, this makes Harold one of the best tertiary characters in the show. Number 9, Thomas. Wow, the titular character makes my top 10. This isn't a joke, I think Thomas is a genuinely good character. He's the perfect protagonist for this show, because while he isn't a total jerk like Gordon and James, he's not fully mature either the way Edward is. He usually knows to do the right thing, but he's not perfect, and his arrogance can get him into situations worth avoiding. This is a hot take, but I really hate him in seasons 3 through 5. I feel he was way too nice, and we didn't see any transition between his season 2 character and his season 3 one. Season 6 and 7 on the other hand, handle him really well by bringing back his flaws while also showing signs of development. Unlike seasons 3 through 5, he still makes mistakes, but you can tell that he's developed from the Railway series because he understands when he's in the wrong and feels bad for it. As the protagonist of the show, Thomas's character fluctuates a lot, but when the writers get him right, they absolutely nail him. If you want to know how Thomas should be written, look no further than Thomas and the Statue, a fantastic episode that sums up his character perfectly, flawed but not irredeemable. Number 8, Bertie. Bertie doesn't have an arc, he's never received any character development, and he's never once had his own spotlight episode. And yet he's one of the most iconic characters in the series. Bertie, in my opinion, benefits from not developing as a character, because his consistent cheeky persona is always fun to see. I love his rivalry with Thomas, because neither of them are better than the other, but they're both very likeable at the same time, and it goes from the very first season all the way to the end of the Brenner era. Thomas and Bertie is one of the best season 1 episodes, because unlike Spencer, Bertie shows that people can be rivals and friends at the same time. From this point on, he and Thomas constantly tease and sometimes annoy each other, but despite that, they're firm friends. Bertie's chase shows that he'll wear himself out to help Thomas's passengers, and seeing Thomas return the favour in one of the few watchable season 21 episodes is very fitting. Of the two road vehicles introduced in Tank Engine Thomas Again, Bertie is easily the superior of the two. Number 7, Emily. Emily is a great character, and she stands out to me personally. I'll never forgive season 11 and the CGI series for what they did to her, but in the model era she's very well written. I love her in season 7. She's a kind, caring friend to other engines and always looks out for the others, even if no one else will. She's also not afraid to speak up if need be, as seen in Salty Stormy Tale. However, the Hit era did an even better job with her. They kept her season 7 persona, but made her more flawed and imperfect. She still tries to do the right thing and look out for her friends, but is sometimes misguided and overly strict, which can lead to conflict with others. I really like this, as it makes her more than just a girl Edward, and creates more dynamics with other characters. Emily and the Special Coaches is her best episode, as it's a perfect showcase of her strengths and weaknesses. She's the driving force of the dispute, but she's kind enough to realise it and redeem herself, and is willing to forgive anyone, even if it's Diesel. Season 8 was Emily's season, as it gave her a lot of spotlight in order to promote her to main character status, and it was very clever to not fully add her to Tidmouth Sheds until the following special, Calling All Engines. Contrast that to Rebecca's 5-second introduction in season 22. As well as all that, Emily has a stunning design, and I've always had a soft spot for her dynamic with Thomas. And yes, I massively prefer her to Duck. I'd say that if I hated her. Number 6, Stephen. Listen, I love Skarloey, Rheneas and Duke as much as the next guy, but none of them hold a candle to Steven, the best character from the CGI era hands down. Most Sage characters are written as flawless and serious, but Steven is different. He's a wise giver of advice and a kind mentor to younger engines like Percy, but he's also really fun. Despite his design, he isn't depicted as ancient, but rather as a cool uncle that everyone wants to have. He isn't necessarily meant to be taken seriously all the time, but even then, he's someone to respect. Slow Steven in particular shows how brave he is in dangerous situations. But he's not perfect either. He's shown to be overly eager to work in King of the Railway, and the Afternoon Tea Express reveals his insecurities. Steven's episodes aren't about younger characters underestimating their elders. Instead, they're about the elder himself, and they manage him really well. Runaway Engine was the most insulting send-off Steven could have received, but most of his other episodes are great, and I give him the crown of the Brenner era's MVP. Number 5, Mighty Mac. You probably weren't expecting to see a Season 9 character in the top 5, were you? Mighty and Mac are my favourite characters from the Hit era, and they're a very unique play on the twin character concept. They're one of very few characters whose design is just as useful as their characters for story ideas. Having a double Farley locomotive incorporated into the Skarloey Railway is a really clever move, and making it be two characters who can't agree with each other leads to very interesting writing potential. Unlike Donald and Douglas, they can't go their separate ways when they argue. They're stuck to each other 24/7, so when they quarrel it can cause trouble for everyone. Some say that that's stupid, childish writing, but I'd take it over the character is rude to another character but gets humiliated in a way similar to what they said formula any day. Their debut episode is fantastic and one of the best of Season 9 for me. I know they never get any spotlight after their debut, but I think they're the kind of characters who are more interesting from having very few episodes. Number 4, Jack. The Pack is one of the best things that has ever happened to this franchise, and they're more than likely going to be the topic of future videos. Ever since I was a kid, Jack has been my favourite member of the Pack, and that's because of how his flaws and qualities go hand in hand. He embodies the eagerness kids have to help and be part of a team, but this is treated just as much of a weakness as it is a strength. He's sometimes too helpful, and ends up jumping into places he doesn't belong. But despite that, he's a good friend who stands up for himself and others, and will act instinctually in the face of danger, damaging his arms in the process. I think Jack is one of the best introductions of any character in the show, and I might make a video on why I think this. Just like Thomas, Jack would be the perfect protagonist for a spin-off that the Pack could have had, if it weren't for the fact that a great show about construction vehicles already exists. Number 3, Salty. Salty can be described in one word, iconic. He started Season 6 off on a strong foot and has been a mainstay in the show ever since. The main reason I love Salty is because he shows that Season 6 and 7 were not following the same formulas that Seasons 1 through 5 were. His introduction is completed in a single episode rather than a 3-episode long arc, and his character might seem gimmicky on paper, but in execution is anything but. Instead of having one defining flaw that results in him receiving karma, there are multiple layers to his character. Salty Secret and Salty Stormy Tale are both fantastic episodes that show us what he's about. On the outside, he's a friendly, cheerful guy who likes to have fun and tell stories, but he's also very hard-working and reliable. He's able to manage trucks in ways that no one else can, and his quick thinking is what saved an entire ship from crashing. His main weakness, his sensitivity, takes up the minority of his episodes, and is vastly overshadowed by his qualities. There's also a stern side to him that's shown in James Goes Too Far, and he's one of the reasons why that episode is so great. I also really like how he's never once been used as a plot device for the not all diesels are bad trope. Characters like Boko and Rusty exist solely to make that moral as obvious as possible and nothing else, but Ghislaine saw Salty as his own character first, and I really respect that. Number 2, Gordon. No matter what Season 5 tries to tell you, there is so much more to Gordon than just a grouchy, pompous express engine. Gordon is the perfect example of a flawed protagonist. He acts pompous to everyone else because of his status on the railway, but is humbled when he gets humiliated, and forms an alliance with anyone else who went down the same track. He proves to be worthy of pulling important passengers like the Queen, and when other engines are acting too big for their buffers, Gordon is the one who comes up with a plan to bring them down to Earth. When he meets Spencer in Season 7, he's looking at a reflection of who he once was, and his arc comes full circle. I don't think there's ever been a better portrayal of him than Squeak, Rattle and Roll. This is where we learn that deep down, Gordon's afraid of dying, but if it means pleasing the Fat Controller, he's willing to go out with a bang. That episode is darker than anything that the overrated Season 5 could ever produce, and is what makes Gordon one of the best characters in all of Thomas and Friends history. Before we reach the end of this list, I'd like to briefly name a couple of honourable mentions who didn't make the list but were very close. They are Sir Handel, Mavis and the model series incarnation of Henry. And now we've reached number 1, and I'm sure you all know who this is, as I've made a whole video dedicated to his greatness. So, the winner of the gold medal of my favourite Thomas character is... Mr. Bubbles. Okay, just kidding, it's Fergus. Fergus is a fantastic character for many reasons. If you want to know why, just watch my video on him as it explains everything. Fergus only appears in a total of 3 episodes, but is very complex. His authoritarianism leads to the annoyance of others, but he does so for the right reasons, and proves to be a hero despite his flaws. He's also got a lot of writing potential in his design. Salty Stormy Tale is the only episode he appears in where he isn't the protagonist, and yet his flywheel is the key to resolving the climax. If Fergus is in an episode, he drives it forward, either with his character or design. Fergus never makes small cameos or background appearances. No matter what role he plays in an episode, it's a vital one. All of the episodes that Fergus appears in are 10 out of 10. Fergus Breaks the Rules in particular might well be my favourite episode of the whole show. It's a fantastic representation of the history of his basis, and people who say he's out of character have never actually watched the episode. His theme is also extremely catchy, and one that I can't stop listening to. Those are my 20 favourite characters of Thomas and Friends. Thank you all again for 500 subs, and let's hope for 500 more in the future. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Be sure to share your favourite characters in the comments, and see you all round.